They just wanted a quiet Tuesday drive. What they got was public humiliation. 2 officers, 1 baseless accusation, and dozens of eyes watching an elderly couple being treated like suspects. Just when hope seemed lost, their sonar marine arrived. And in that moment, the power shifted. This wasn't just a mistaken stop. It was a wake-up call. Subscribe to the channel now to witness a confrontation you'll never forget. The old bronze-colored Buick rolled quietly down the country road, where the late afternoon sunlight poured like honey onto the grass. The surroundings were calm, no honking horns, no smogist, the quiet hum of tires on asphalt. Inside the car, Mr. James Holloway, his silver hair gleaming, age-spotted hands resting gently on the wheel, smiled softly as he glanced at his wife. Beside him, Maria, her hair neatly pinned up and eyes shining with warmth, hummed along to a gospel tune playing on the vintage radio. Just a week ago, they had celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. No big party. No expensive gifts. This Tuesday drive was their chosen celebration, a gentle escape from the bustle of family life. "Look," Maria said, pointing out at the field of sunflowers glowing along the roadside. "Just like back when we lived in that tiny apartment." James chuckled, remembering how she used to fill every corner of their home with bright flowers as if she were holding sunshine in her hands. Soon, they turned into a small roadside diner, its faded wooden roof and gently swaying sign greeting them like an old friend. "I've been craving that apple pie for years," James said with a grin, carefully pulling into the gravel parking lot. Maria nodded, and together they walked hand in hand to a patio table shaded by a large umbrella. The air smelled of fresh coffee and bacon. Birds chirped from the trees, and the breeze carried the faint scent of baked apples. They sat down, smiling at each other, the smile of 2 souls who had weathered decades side by side. No words were needed. Everything was perfect. A Tuesday afternoon carved from their fondest memories. But what they didn't know was that in just a few minutes, that peace would be shattered, and the apple pie they had been dreaming of would be replaced by a bitter taste of humiliation. Just as James pulled out a chair for Maria and sat down, before they could even order, the growl of an engine shattered the calm. A police cruiser came tearing in from the main road, skidding into the gravel lot and kicking up a thick cloud of dust. Birds scattered from the trees above. The warmth of the afternoon turned cold in an instant, like a sudden storm crashing into a summer's day. 2 officers stepped out. No greeting, no smile, just a cold, sharp presence that sliced through the peaceful air. The male officer, bald, with eyes like steel, marched straight toward James. The female officer, her face obscured by dark sunglasses, began circling the old Buick like she was inspecting evidence. They didn't ask names. They didn't explain. To them, James and Maria weren't people. They were suspects. "That your vehicle?" the male officer asked, his voice curt, laced with suspicion. James was startled, but remained calm. "Yes, officer, it's ours." End of quote. "Do you have proof of ownership?" The question dropped like a blade. Cold and cutting, Maria gently tightened her grip on James's hand beneath the table, her eyes scanning the scene with growing concern. James tried to stay composed. "We've owned that car for over 20 years. The papers, they're at home, in our safe." His voice trembled not from fear, but from a deep, rising sense of injustice. "How convenient," the officer muttered with a smirk. Maria took a deep breath, trying to stay poised, but the sting of humiliation was starting to settle in. No one had explained why they were being questioned. No one cared to. The sunshine, the smell of coffee, the birdsong of it seemed to fade, replaced by the cold scent of suspicion and unchecked authority. Their peaceful anniversary outing had turned into an interrogation, and these 2 kind, law-abiding elders were being treated like criminals. In the eyes of the officers, they weren't Mr. and Mrs. Holloway. They were just two black people sitting beside a suspicious car. The tension thickened as the female officer stepped back toward the cruiser, muttering something into her radio. After a brief pause, she turned around, her voice sharp and clipped. "The license plate doesn't match the vehicle registered in our system. We have reason to believe this car is stolen." James furrowed his brow, trying to keep his composure. "But we've had this car for over 20 years. I can provide the papers." "Where are they?" the male officer cut in, his eyes piercing. "At home? In a safe," James answered. "How convenient." The officer sneered, stepping in too close. "Listen up, old man. We believe this vehicle may be stolen. Step away from the car. Now." Maria gasped and clutched her husband's hand. "James, don't say anything more," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Ma'am, remain silent and stay where you are." The female officer barked, loud enough for bystanders to turn their heads. Without hesitation, she swung the car door open and began rummaging through the glove compartment, yanking it hard as if she expected something to leap out and confess. "I'm asking you to stop." James raised his voice, his control slipping. "This is our property. You don't have the right. You're obstructing a police investigation? Do you want to be arrested for that?" the male officer snapped, his hand resting on the grip of his gun. Maria froze. She no longer recognized the world she was standing in. A moment ago, they were just two elderly people out, celebrating love. Now they were suspects, surrounded by growing stares and public humiliation. They weren't just searching the car, they were stripping away dignity, privacy, humanity piece by piece. The warm scent of coffee and apple pie had vanished, replaced by the acrid stench of power abused. The sharp edge of prejudice hung heavy in the air. To those officers, the truth didn't matter. A registration error meant nothing. All they saw was two black people next to a nice Karen in their eyes. That alone was reason enough to accuse. The male officer suddenly grabbed James by the arm, yanking him away from the table as if he were escorting a dangerous suspect. James stumbled slightly but held his composure, even as his heart pounded in his chest. Maria stood trembling, tears brimming in her eyes. What was unfolding went far beyond what any decent person should ever have to endure. "Whose car is this? Who's listed on the title?" the officer barked, his tone more interrogation than inquiry. "We bought it brand new, from the dealership, over 20 years ago," James replied, trying to keep his voice steady, though anger and disbelief tightened his chest. At that moment, the female officer stepped out of the car, holding a small, worn photograph. "Who are the people in this picture?" she demanded. It was a photo of their grandchildren, taken during Maria's 80th birthday, a cherished memory now treated like a piece of evidence. Maria brought a trembling hand to her mouth, overwhelmed with emotion. She couldn't speak. Her throat tightened with a blend of hurt and fury. Never in her life had she felt so violated, not just by what was done, but by the coldness, the callousness of it all. A simple family moment had been twisted into suspicion under the harsh gaze of prejudice. From the nearby road, people began to gather. A few pulled over, stepping out of their cars. Some recorded the scene. Others just stood watching, brows furrowed in silent judgment. The earlier hush gave way to whispers, side glances, and audible sighs of disapproval. What had started as a private moment between an elderly couple was now a public spectacle. This wasn't a routine stop-it, was a humiliation in broad daylight. A stage where old prejudices were acted out, complete with an audience. And just as if it still meant anything was now being stretched thin between official authority and the trampled pride of two innocent people whose only offense was having the wrong color skin. Just as the tension reached a boiling point, when Maria could barely stand, and James was moments away from being dragged off her, low rumble cut through the thick air. A black SUV rolled slowly into the gravel lot, its tires crunching over stone like a warning bell. The crowd parted slightly, heads turning toward the newcomer, curiosity flickering in their eyes. The car door opened, and out stepped a man in full U.S. Marine Corps dress blues. His uniform was crisp, medals gleaming under the sun, posture straight as steel. It was Elijah Holloway, the only son of James and Maria, who had just left base that morning, planning to surprise his parents for their 50th wedding anniversary. He had hoped to bring joy. What he found instead froze him in place. His father was being restrained, interrogated like a thief. His mother stood helplessly nearby, her face pale and eyes filled with tears. Two officers loomed over them, while a growing crowd watched silently. No crime. No danger. Just two elderly black people being treated like criminals for sitting beside their own car. Elijah's face hardened. His breath slowed. His steps became firm, deliberate each one, echoing like a drumbeat through the gravel. His gaze never left his parents. He could see the shame in his mother's eyes, the pain in his father's. It struck him deeper than any battlefield wound. And though he wore the uniform of a Marine, what burned in him now wasn't military discipline, was love, fury, the kind of righteous anger only a son could feel while watching the two people he admired most be humiliated. This was not a man losing control. It was a man finding purpose. Elias' anger didn't erupt, it focused it. It condensed into resolve, because he remembered every lesson his parents taught him: to stand tall, speak truth, and defend what's right. And now, they needed him, not as a soldier, but as their son. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply walked shoulders square, jaw clenched, eyes sharp toward the scene. With every step, the atmosphere shifted, not because of his rank or his uniform, but because justice had just entered the parking lot. And nothing, from that moment on, would remain the same. Elijah marched forward, each step sharp and deliberate, his military boots striking the pavement like a drumbeat of reckoning. There was no hesitation, no fear only. The quiet force of a man who had stared down danger, but now faced something more personal, injustice unfolding before his very eyes. "I am Marine Gunnery Sergeant Elijah Holloway," he declared, his voice cutting through the thick air like a blade. "These are my parents. What the hell is going on here?" The male officer flinched, instinctively taking a step back. He hadn't expected to be challenged by someone with that kind of presence. He stammered, We're just conducting a routine check. The license plate didn't match the records." "Didn't match?" Elias stepped closer, his stare unrelenting. "They've owned this car for decades. Are you seriously suggesting they stole their own vehicle? Is that your justification for rifling through their belongings? For treating them like criminals? For terrifying two elderly people over a system error?" His voice wasn't raised, but it thundered with authority. He turned to the female officer. "Do you understand what you did when you held up that photo of my nieces and nephews and asked, 'Who are these people?' Do you realize how deeply you insulted my mother?" The officers stood frozen. Around them, the crowd murmured louder. Heads nodded. Phones were now recording openly. What was once quiet curiosity had become public condemnation. Elijah continued, "They are not suspects. They are my parents, honest, hard-working citizens who've never broken a law in their lives. And you treated them like this because of their skin color?" The moment cracked open. Applause rippled through the crowd. An elderly woman stepped forward and gently placed a hand on Maria's shoulder, whispering something that brought fresh tears to her eyes. James tried to hold back emotion, but the pride in his gaze now burned bright. Elijah the son, The soldier had arrived at exactly the right time, and with truth, with presence, with pure love for his parents. He left those officers speechless. He didn't need to threaten, didn't need force, only the moral weight of justice. And in that instant, beneath the golden light of the setting sun and a wave of thunderous applause, justice had finally shown up. Elijah took a deep breath and turned to face the crowd that had gathered tightly around the parking lot. He didn't need a microphone. His voice rang out clear and strong, a declaration of truth in what had become an unofficial but far more righteous courtroom. "My parents," he said, gesturing toward James and Maria, "have lived honest, hard-working lives. They raised their family, served their community, and carried themselves with dignity. They don't deserve to be humiliated. They don't deserve to be interrogated in public like this over a clerical error or the color of their skin." His words struck like a match to dry timber. The atmosphere shifted. What had been a silent crowd began to stir. People nodded. A few voices responded quietly but firmly. "That's right." An elderly woman stepped forward, gently took Maria's hand, and looked at her with eyes full of shared pain and compassion. No words needed. A young man pulled out his phone and began filming. "People need to see this," he said, his voice thick with anger and emotion. Others followed. In moments, the small parking lot became a stage of justice lit by spotlights. But by the gaze of witnesses who knew the difference between right and wrong, the two officers began to visibly falter. The female officer glanced nervously at the phones, her lips pressed into a tight line. The male officer looked around, uncertain, his hand falling from his belt, as if he could feel the power slipping from his grip. Their justifications now sounded hollow. No one believed them, and no one cared to hear them anymore. Truthonsi Fragilino echoed boldly through the crowd, undeniable and unstoppable. And in that moment, Elijah did more than protect his parents. He awakened a community, turning bystanders into witnesses, silence into resistance, and injustice into reckoning. As the tension thickened and the wave of public outrage swelled, the two officers could no longer ignore the shift in power. They were no longer in control of the situation. They were standing before a crowd that was wide awake, and a son who would not let his parents be dishonored without consequence. The male officer finally lowered his head, his once firm voice now barely audible. "If we caused any inconvenience, we apologize." The words fell flat, lifeless, out of place, and painfully inadequate. The female officer added, avoiding eye contact, "It was a system error. We were just following protocol. There was no intention to offend." But the apology, so mechanical and detachedly, deepened the discomfort. No one clapped. No one sighed in relief. James and Maria stood silently, still shaken. Maria clutched her husband's hand, her gaze now locked on Elijah, the one steady presence in a moment that had robbed them of all dignity. Elijah stepped forward, each stride deliberate, his anger held tight behind clenched fists. He looked the officers dead in the eyes, his voice low and unwavering. "An apology means nothing if you don't understand what you've done. Do you have any idea how my parents felt? Do you realize that what you did was soaked in racial bias?" The officers said nothing. Their silence was no longer commanding, it was exposing. Their eyes flickered, their faces pale, caught between shame and resentment. And in that moment, the word "sorry" ceased to be an olive branch. It became an indictment, a confession masked as protocol. Their words rang hollow, powerless against the weight of truth now standing before them. The crowd remained silent, not out of confusion, but out of shared clarity, because what had been broken, respect, safety, dignity, could not be mended by a perfunctory apology. Not today. Not like that. At last, with no more excuses left to offer, the two officers quietly retreated to their patrol car. Gone was the authoritative stride they had arrived with. Now, Their steps were heavy, weighed down by the gravity of their actions and the eyes of a crowd that had witnessed every moment. They left behind a parking lot charged with emotion, anger, sorrow, and yet a powerful sense of dignity reclaimed. Maria no longer held back. Tears spilled freely as she clung tightly to Elijah's arm, as if holding on to the one thing that had anchored her through this nightmare. "Thank you, son. Thank you for standing up for us," she sobbed, her voice breaking as her tears soaked into his uniform. Elijah held her close, arms firm around her like a shield, forged in love and justice. "I'm always here, Mom," he whispered, his voice low but resolute. He turned to his father and gently placed a steady hand on James' shoulder. Their eyes met a gaze full of pain, the other brimming with unwavering love and fierce protection all around them. The crowd began to clap, not loudly, not theatrically, but with genuine feeling. People stepped forward, offering comfort and solidarity, bridging the gap left by humiliation. An elderly woman leaned close to Maria and softly said she had experienced something similar. A young man bowed slightly and thanked Elijah for speaking up, for all of them. Then, the diner owner emerged, eyes moist with emotion, carrying 2 warm slices of apple pie and 2 steaming cups of coffee. "On the house," he said gently. "You two deserve some peace after all this. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it didn't need to be. A slice of pie, a cup of coffee, a heartfelt embrace as more acts, yet powerful proof that love, when it shows up at the right moment, can rise above even the cruelest injustices." This story, though it began with a peaceful Tuesday afternoon, ends with profound questions about justice, dignity, and the invisible barriers that still linger around us. It forces us to reflect: what truly makes a society civilized? Is it just law, sir? Is it the way people treat one another, especially in moments that seem small? Through the eyes of a son, through the silent rage of a crowd that finally erupted into applause, we're reminded that truth has power if we're brave enough to speak it. This story doesn't ask you to pick sides. It invites you to share your honest perspective. What do you think allows moments like this to keep happening? Does racism still exist around you? And most importantly, when do you believe it will finally end? In 2030? 2040? Or will it always be a battle we pass down through generations? Share your thoughts in the comments, not to argue, but to open dialogue, because real change begins when we start talking about what others are afraid to name.